Motivation is a very misunderstood topic. And so in this video, I'm going to explain what motivation is and how you can dramatically increase your motivation. From a simple perspective, motivation is the reason to act. It's always driven by a reason or an outcome. And psychologists break down motivation into one of two forms. Either you're approaching something you want, so they call this approach motivation, or you're avoiding something you don't want. And so the motivation is actually the reason to act. And so if I really, really need to go to the bathroom, right? Then I'm going to be heavily motivated to find a toilet or something like that, right? So the motivation or the reason is the cause driving my behavior. The philosophical term for this is teleology. And it's basically the idea that every action is driven by a goal or a reason. And that goal or reason is something you're trying to approach, meaning something you want to see happen or something you're avoiding from happening. And every action is driven by a reason. And the reason is the why. When you understand the why, then you'll start to really understand the what and the how. Viktor Frankl, for those who haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, he was in the concentration camps, the Nazi concentration camps during World War II. He wrote a book on the topic called Man's Search for Meaning, and he was showing how people in those critical conditions where they were being starved to death, people around them were being killed, they basically had everything in their life taken away, how they ultimately, even in those conditions, could have a deep why to live. He even quoted Nietzsche all the time where he said, when the why is strong enough, you can bear almost any how. There's also another concept or quote behind this, which is when the why is strong enough, you will find the how. That's basically the essence of hope research these days. Hope is having a clear and compelling why and what, and then ultimately being able to find the how or the who's that will help you achieve the goal. That's becoming highly flexible and ultimately reaching the identity of your future self and committing to the point where your future self becomes your standard. Hey, Dr. Benjamin Hardy here, author of Be Your Future Self Now. A quick interruption to your YouTube video to invite you to go to futureself.com so that you can immediately download the one-page Future Self cheat sheet, as well as the full Future Self course and other goodies, all free. That's futureself.com. Now back to your YouTube video. If you want to dramatically increase your motivation, all you have to do is dramatically increase your ambition or your reasons to what you're trying to accomplish and why you're trying to accomplish it. It's really that simple. How I look at it is you make your goals massively bigger and more emotionally and psychologically compelling. You have bigger goals. Making your goals massively bigger is going to compel stronger action. Bigger goals are more compelling, but also you have deep, powerful reasons for doing it. Even Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. And so one question to ask is, why wouldn't you make your goals massively bigger and more emotionally compelling? Well, one reason people don't make their goals bigger is simply because of ego. They're too afraid of trying to do something that they think will fail. This is what Carol Dweck would call a fixed mindset. People with a fixed mindset don't believe that they can achieve and do really big things, and so they go for small goals because if you're going for something small, chances are you can actually achieve it. And people with a fixed mindset are really worried about failure, and they're really worried about what other people think. And so one of the reasons why people don't set 10 times or massively bigger goals is because they're afraid to fail. If you have way bigger goals, then you're very likely to fail and mess up or, have a lot of failures along the way. And so the ego part is that you don't want to look bad. You don't want to look bad first off to yourself. You don't want to have to face hard feedback and learning. I love the quote from Naval Ravikant. He said that becoming an outlier is not about 10,000 hours, it's about 10,000 iterations. And if you're going for a massively bigger goal, think, for example, Elon Musk trying to go to Mars. The size of the goal is ultimately going to determine the intensity of the process and the intensity of the learning curve and the intensity of the iterations. And there's another great quote from Dan Sullivan on the subject. He said that the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. If you have massively bigger goals and they're very compelling and you're no longer worried from an ego standpoint about what other people think, then you can be much more motivated because you'll have a much bigger goal and much deeper reasons. And so it's crazy. It's that simple that if you want more motivation, you just have a bigger goal and a shorter timeline. It's really crazy that it's that simple. That is all you have to do is have a bigger goal, deeper reasons, and a shorter timeline. But that's really what it is. You absolutely can be massively motivated in the present. The biggest, hardest part is really just getting yourself to set bigger and bigger goals with shorter timelines and ultimately to get yourself committed. One big component of this is going from thinking to feeling to knowing. And once you go from thinking about something, imagining it, Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Dr. Daniel Gilbert, the Harvard psychologist, said that most people don't really think about their future selves. They don't imagine it at all. And so you want to stretch your imagination of your goals, stretch your imagination of what you can do, and then ultimately get to a place of feeling, which is acceptance and allowance. and then getting to a place of knowing. Florence Shin said that faith knows it has already received and acts accordingly. Now, a key concept or a key aspect of all of this is that you make your future self the standard for what you do in the present, not your past self. You also keep your eyes forward, looking at your future self, speaking of your future self, thinking about your future self, and using your future self as the filter rather than worrying so much about what other people think. That's the ego side of things. I actually love the quote and the concept that it's much more powerful to optimize for where you'll be in 10 years from now versus 10 days. If you're overly worried about where you're at in 10 days from now, then you're probably too worried about what other people think about you. You're being very tactical but not strategic. If you start thinking about where do I want to be 10 years from now, and you're not that worried about where things are at 10 days from now, then you're okay in the messy middle. You're okay in the process. This also fits with research about past, present, and future selves. Dr. Daniel Gilbert says that your present self is as transient and as fleeting as the present moment, and that your future self will be wildly different. Dr. Brene Brown said something beautiful, and it fits with having a growth mindset, and it fits with future self. And she said, are you more worried about getting it right, or are you more worried about being right? If you're trying to be right, then you're trying to prove your current perspective. You don't want to deal with the failure. That's the fixed mindset, is that you're trying to be right. You're trying to be right about who you are, but you're also trying to prove your capability. That's actually a big part of the fixed mindset, is that you're trying to prove yourself to other people. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you don't need to try to prove yourself. I don't need to try to prove my current self because I know my current self is as transient and as fleeting as the present moment. I'm not that worried about where things are at in 10 days. It's okay if things look like a total dumpster fire right now. I'm okay iterating, changing and stuff. I'm more worried about where things are at in 5, 10 years. And so rather than trying to prove myself and trying to look right and trying to be right, I'm more interested in trying to get it right, which means that I know that I'm currently not right, which is okay because I want learning, I want feedback, I want growth. I know in a week from now, my future self will be very different. Part of being what psychologists would call psychologically flexible is not needing to be right. It's about truly learning and growing, but it's also recognizing that your past self is a different person. I'm no longer the same person I was in the past. I now know better. I don't need to do the same things my past self was doing. I don't need to be committed to the things my past self was. If it's not relevant, I'm letting it go. I don't have to believe the same things my past self did, but also I know my future self is going to be different, and I'm actually operating from my future. To be heavily more motivated, you just have to have bigger goals, deeper reasons, and then you got to get to that place of commitment where it's what you want. It's your standard. It's who you are. And you're no longer worried about what other people think. You're keeping your eye forward on your future self. You're no longer worried about your current self or the people around you. And you're no longer worried about the people behind you. You keep your eye focused on your future self, your language on your future self. You assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled using the language of Neville Goddard. And you stop worrying so much about the people around you, which is looking sideways or looking at your past. You're letting your future dictate who you are and what you do in the present. And as simple as it sounds, wanting more motivation is all about simply making the goals massively bigger, having deeper reasons, and then reaching that place of commitment as soon as you can. You know you're committed to your future self when you start letting go of the things in your present and past that no longer matter. You also reach a place of commitment to your future self when you're no longer trying to be right, but instead you're trying to get it right, meaning you don't really care what other people think. You don't have the ego of trying to prove yourself. Instead, you take on massive learning, massive feedback, and you ultimately use all those experiences to transform yourself and transform your experience, transform your learning. And then it just becomes really fun because then you start getting massive momentum and you start growing and changing more in a week, month, year than the average person does in a decade or maybe even in a lifetime. And then it's just really beautiful. Then you start having massive momentum. Then you're just transforming a lot. And you actually have less and less ego because you don't need to prove yourself. I don't need to try to prove that I have all the answers. And I'm also not mad at my past self, even though I know that I'm much further along than my past self. I have massive empathy, love, compassion, and gratitude towards my past self. And I'm emotionally getting more and more connected to my future self, going from thinking to feeling to knowing. And because I'm connected to my future self and letting my future self dictate what I do in the present, I'm first off doing a lot of commitment and courage and humbly learning and being massively blown away by what I'm learning. But I'm also very open to feedback, and that's part of being psychologically flexible, where you're seeking feedback and you're continuously learning, evolving your perspectives. And so motivation is the reason for acting. There's always a reason, and making the reason bigger and more compelling and then getting committed is how you have more motivation. A positive psychology is fundamentally two things. It's an increasingly better past that you're increasingly grateful for. Your past is always happening for you, and it's an increasingly compelling, massive future that's stretching you in the present, that's ultimately inviting you to learn, transform, and grow, becoming more capable, more humble. So that's the essence of it. You want more motivation? Have bigger and deeper reasons, and then reach a place of commitment where you've gone from thinking to feeling to knowing. Have a beautiful day.